Today's gospel comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Just before he sits on that mount to preach, Jesus is accused by the religious authorities of not following the law. He plucked grain on the Sabbath. He heals people on the Sabbath. He's leading people away from God's law, they say. Jesus responds to that accusation by saying, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill." What is God's law? Love. Love, love, love. All of the rules of the Bible, all the rules of religion, all of it is meant to make you love. But if you are following the rules so strictly that you forget how to love, well, then you're the one doing it wrong. It's like putting a light under the bushel, or like salt losing its saltiness. If you lose the capacity to love, well, then what's the point? If your love is obscured by the rules, you are failing God. In fact, you can follow all the rules to a T, but if you don't love, then you're the one breaking God's law. God's law is love. The rules are there to help you to love. Now, the Pharisees were famous for following all the rules, but Jesus accuses them of failing to love. Jesus isn't the one breaking the law, he says they are. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. God's law is love. Love. And we're to have that law written on our hearts. We are to commit to it fully, meditate on it day and night. That's what we do with the law. What do we do with all the rules? Do rules not matter anymore? Is Jesus giving us permission to ignore them all? In today's portion of the Sermon on the Mount that we heard, Jesus turns his attention to the rules. He's not telling people to abandon the rules, but the opposite. For him, the rules didn't go far enough. If you have God's law on your heart, then you're going to be following those rules and doing even more. Let me go through the examples that Jesus gives. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. Of course, don't murder people. When God wrote down the Ten Commandments, Moses must have shook his head and said, "Goodness, why does this even need to be said?" Why not murder? Because it's not loving. Do you hear me, Shirley Tesmer? You resist that murderous impulse. No more murder, please. So the rule is, don't murder people. But the law of God is love people. That means you can't hate them, you can't insult them, you can't hold bitterness and anger towards them. It's not enough to just follow the rule. You don't get a gold star for not murdering today, surely. You need to live by the law of love. That changes everything about the way you interact with the world. For Jesus, this is so important that he would rather you spend all Sunday loving your neighbor than going to church. Church and religion are meaningless if you aren't loving. So before you offer your gift at the altar, make sure you've reconciled with the people you've hurt. Second example. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery," but I say to you, that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Rule: don't have affairs. Law: love your spouse. If you are focused on loving your spouse, then you're not going to be doing the things that betray their trust, that demean their character, that ignores their needs. This isn't about sex. This is more than cheating. This is about loving the person that you share your life with. We get hung up on the word lust. We think it's just physical, but that's not true. You can lust for power, for example. We see a lot of that sort of lust proudly on display these days. Lust is any self-centered greed. It's objectifying another person, reducing them, using them, exploiting them for your own satisfaction. In this way, lust is the opposite of love. To lust is to harm. Jesus is so against lust that he says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Not literally, but it's how seriously we need to take it. This is bigger than don't have affairs. This is don't reduce, objectify, exploit another human being. For the same reason, Jesus was against divorce. Now, at the time, women had no power. To be divorced would have ruined them economically and left them vulnerable to major exploitation. But divorce was allowed. It wasn't breaking a rule. So men would tire of one wife, divorce her, marry another, and they became serial monogamists. That was a deeply selfish and unloving thing to do. In Jesus' mind, it's equal to adultery because it broke God's law to love. When looking at divorce today, we need to apply that same law of love. The situation's different, though, for women today. You're not destitute because you're divorced. In fact, not allowing divorce had forced some women to remain in abusive situations. So for our context, maybe the most loving thing could be to allow for divorce. That's the position of the Presbyterian Church in Canada now. We say that divorce is not good, but we make pastoral exceptions for it. We change a rule in order to better follow God's law. Third example. Again, you have heard that it was said in ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool. Rule, don't swear you're going to do something if you're not going to do it. Jesus says, why does that even need to be a rule? Why? Because people were promising one thing and doing another. They were being mistrustful. They were deceiving each other. I wouldn't worry about the used car salesman until I hear them say, I swear to God that this is the best deal you'll ever see. If you feel the need to swear by God or by earth or whatever just to get people to believe you, what does that say of your trustworthiness? If you are following God's law, if you are loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, and your neighbor as yourself, then I should never have to fear that you might try to deceive me. I should be able to take you at your word. Your yes would be yes, and your no would be no. Those were Jesus' 3 examples of following the law. But I think we could add a few more. You have heard it said, don't litter. But I tell you, take care of the environment you are in. Be mindful of how your behavior affects the environment around you, both ecological and social. Your very presence impacts the land and impacts our community. So be a presence that makes the world better, that brings healing, that calms others, that restores our earth. If you love your neighbor, you want them to live in an environment where they can thrive. Rule, don't litter. Law, care for our environment. 2. You have heard it said, don't curse. But I say to you, say nothing bad about anyone. This isn't whether the F word slips from your mouth when you stub your toe, I was working at PetSmart and I once dropped a pallet jack on my foot. Apparently, I belted out a number of words that I didn't realize I was saying until the manager from the other end of the store came to see who had such a foul mouth. So, personally, I don't think God cares about that type of swearing, but God does care about what you think about other people. Whether I say it out loud or just in my head, thinking someone is an idiot or a bigot or a jerk is worse than swear words. The terms label them. In your mind, it defines them and reduces them to their worst qualities. You'll never see their good side. You'll never have a chance to be their friend if in your mind you've labeled them with insults. Let your language be loving. And last one. You've heard it said, return your seats to the upright position. I'm going to be on a plane this week. But I say to you, and to whoever happens to be sitting in front of me on that plane, don't recline your seats to begin with. Especially if it's not an overseas flight. To make sure my neighbor has as much legroom as possible, I can sit upright for a couple of hours. Planes are uncomfortable for everyone. I don't need to make it worse for my neighbor who might be taller or bigger than me. The point of all of this is love. Rules might say one thing, but we as Christians are called to a higher law. In every situation, we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean to love? What does God's law of love demand of us? We have to be careful because even though we're not breaking any rules, we might be breaking God's law. The rules are meant to guide us, but they are not an end goal. Love is. When we lose sight of love, when we let rules take priority over compassion, justice, and mercy, we miss the heart of God's will for us. So as we go from here today, let's not measure our righteousness by what we avoid, by what we don't do, but by what we actively pursue. Are we loving boldly? Are we making peace? Are we lifting up those who are hurting? Are we living in a way that reflects the heart of God? May our righteousness not be one of rule keeping alone, but of a love so deep, so true, so transformative, that it reveals the very presence of Christ in this world. Amen.